Hello class, I'm gonna go over the CFIIPTS area of operations 2 task C, but more specifically, listen to these words. I'm just gonna go over the regulations and publications related to IFR operations. And that word regulations is important because now you're an instrument student, so you might still have that false assumption that regs are laws and that you go to jail if you don't comply with them. However, it's important that regulations is a word because if you break them, you actually really won't go to jail. Unless you break a law, then you go to jail for that. But breaking the regulations won't get you to jail. They'll get you a fine and you lose your ratings. And since you're working on your instrument, you probably have your private now, so you can lose that rating just like that. And you could also, it's most likely that you'll get a number and you'll get grilled out, and you already get grilled enough out by your CFI. So let's keep the, grilling out of there. There's no, barbecue happening right now. And now that we've got the intro out of the way, and you kind of get a better understanding now, so what regulations should we dive into first? Well, the first regulation is Part 61, our bread and butter here. And I'm sure you already know, the basic 61 regulations that you've learned over private, but now we're gonna add on to that. And so one of the first ones we're gonna add on to is 61.65, which is the IFR requirements needed to actually, get your ratings. And so you have to at least hold a current PPL or be concurrently applying, be able to read, speak, and write English, receive and log ground training from an authorized ground instructor, logbook training endorsements with an authorized instructor, best of knowledge test, and practical test. Flight time logged is 500 hours, cross-country SPIC, 10 hours in a plane, 4 hours, yada, yada, yada. You can read this yourself at 61.65, and I encourage you to read it yourself so you can get a better understanding, because I can say it to you, but unless you read it yourself, it actually won't stick and apply to your brain. And your CFI will most likely make sure that all of this is good anyway if you're applying for this. But I actually like that first sentence as an important distinction. It says hold at least a current PPL or at least be concurrently applying. I've heard stories where people do them both at the same time, and congratulations on them. And would I have done that? I don't know, but those people are built differently. Now, another one I'm just going to briefly mention is CFII privileges limitation 61.195. And that's just for me, and I'm skip over that because it's not really important that we go over that. And then logging instrument flight time 61.51. And this is basically you can log you can only log actual instrument flight time when the pilot operates solely by reference to instruments in actual IMC. And so that's an important distinction whenever you're logging IMC. You can log simulated, right, which you'll most likely be logging a lot of that, but you can only log actual instrument when you're actually in instrument and solely flying by the instruments. And then there's some other informations, but that might not be applicable to you, so we're going to skip over that. And then another thing is 61.57, another bread and butter, and you're going to hear this a lot because this is important. It's your IFR currency. So you know how we talked about in private, currency versus proficiency when you're going up and taking people landing. Well, we have kind of like that here in instrument as well. And so you have to stay current in order to actually be able to do instrument approaches. So you can't just get your instrument license and then 2 years later be like, let me go do, let me go shoot this instrument approach in actual IMC and easy light work. No, you have to be current in order for it to be legal. And even then still, you would still want to be proficient, even if you get all these currencies done before you actually even go to actual IMC. And these requirements are 6 instrument approaches, holding procedures, intercepting and tracking courses through navigational systems. And this can be done in a simulator or in person. But you would, in person, need a safety pilot. That's important. Keep that in mind, safety pilot. And you can do mostly everything except for circular lands. But I mean, if you're getting your currency, you don't need circular lands to reach that currency, as the requirements we just went over. And then after those 6 months have passed, right? After 6 months have passed, then you can act as PIC under IFR, but you can fly with the Safety Pilot CFII, and you need to quickly just get, after you pass your grace period of another 6 months, then you need to get an instrument for proficiency check, and that's to be done by an examiner. Anyways, let's quickly go through this. The scenarios. Okay. And so now we're gonna quickly go over to 91. And so same thing. Now you're just adding stuff onto what you already know as a private pilot. And you probably find some similarities that we're gonna talk about, and some privileges and limitations as an instrument pilot is you can fly IFR now, pretty good, and you can do special VFR, which we're gonna go over, and you can act as safety pilot for IFR training. So how we talked about safety pilot, so if you can get a safety pilot during your grace period, then you can now act as safety pilot for someone else who's trying to get back their currency. And it's pretty cool, something you can do with your buddies. And then there's some VFR on top, 91.155. So basically, as long as you can maintain VFR and cloud clearances and visibility, you're able to request this. I think this is a separate topic if you don't understand this, 91.159, and I can better explain this. And then IFR flight plan is 91.173. ATC compliance is 91.123. Pre-flight inspection, this one's another important one. 91.103, you will see some acronyms. Some people call it NW-RAFT. I call it FAT work. It's basically just going, you need your NOTAMs, weather, known ATC delays, runway lengths, alternative fuel requirements, takeoff and landing distances legally before you can fly. And then another important thing that you'll also hear a lot about is IFR alternates, 91.169, and it's basically saying the requirements that you need to in order for something to even qualify, if you need an alternate, and then what can even qualify as an alternate. And then 91.205, this is equipment, and this is another acronym, grab card, which is generator alternator, radio, two-way nav appropriate to the route of flight. That's important because when people usually think, they just think radio, but nav is also like your GPS and stuff like that is also a requirement needed. And so that's an important distinction to make. Altimeter, ball, that's our slip/skid, clock, attitude indicator, rate of turn, and directional gyro. And then fuel requirements is 91.167, and so it's flying to the alternate plus another additional 45 minutes. And then there's mandatory reports to ATC 91.183, and this is another acronym, Marvelous VFR C500. If I go through it, low-key running out of time, so I'm just gonna quickly skip through that. And that one's kind of less of an important acronym. I'd probably focus on the other two first. And then radio communication failure is 91.185, and these are also important acronyms here. The ones you want to focus on is AVEF and MEA. These will be on your knowledge test and are things that you'll likely be quizzed on. And so AVEF, it's when you have a communication failure, it's your last assigned altitude, vectors, and expected altitude. And then MEA is your highest altitude, minimum altitude, expected altitude from AC, and assigned altitude. Once again, you'll just have to go over this, read about it. You got this I believe in you scenario is, okay, nope. Reporting malfunction in IFR is 91.187. Takeoff and landing on our IFR, 91.175. And if we're part 91, we actually don't have any legal requirements, which is really cool. 121 operators actually do have legal requirements. Basically saying that because we are 91 operations, we are the flight school, we're just doing regular small aviation flying. We don't have any requirements, believe it or not. That's what it's basically all saying. IFR altitudes is 91.179. I'm sure you've had some experience over that in private pilot when you had to, get your assigned cruising altitudes, and the 1, it goes over IFAR altitudes, MEA, MOCO, OROCA, MR, and MA and MK. These are things that you have to know about, not only for your knowledge test, but if you want to be able to read graphs. And it's important, though this is a separate topic, you want to be able to switch your things, you know, to this mode. So you go here, this is so you can get the IFR charts, and then you're changing it from VFR section over here, right? And you're changing it to IFR. Probably not relevant, but I just thought I'd bring that up just in case. And this is what you can look. You can see black and white stuff now. And it's important that you go over this stuff, read it, and know these distinctions so you can actually understand these charts. And then part 97 goes over symbology, which we were talking about here. And there's a lot of stuff that you can go over. Instrument flying book, ACSs, PTSs, FAR aims, chart supplements, departure and arrival procedures. And you know, I'd recommend a lot of people, once again, when going to procedures and you know, departures, arrivals, and approaches over here, right? You'll have FAA and Jeppesen down here because you're probably using ForeFlight here at CAU. And Jeppesen is easy. I'm not gonna lie to you. I started with Jeppesen, but it'll help you in the long run if you just learn FAA charts and just use them. You can always take notes and follow them easier. Please stick with FAA charts, and you're gonna use them on your knowledge test anyways. So, I mean, there's that. And that's it. And hope you guys have an amazing night. Stay sharp. See you later.